And so we continue on with chapter 12 here. And again, we look at 5 different things that science cannot, in principle, explain. Now, it
Wow.
could have certain theories or anything like that. And the 5 cases that he makes here, I think he does a pretty excellent job of kind of picking the 5 things that keeps it in the scientific realm, but also shows kind of where where the naturalistic science cannot tread. And that's not to poo-poo against the natural science. That has its place, but this is areas where it cannot go. And so a lot of the subjects that he brings up here will be interesting to look at because they tend to be thought of maybe in the realm of science. But he makes the case that actually theism, in general, theism, the belief in God, the idea of God, that God has made the world, a God in certain capacity, provides a better theory
Yeah.
to how it came
Explanation.
about.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, we can quabble over, well, then what God? That's not the type of question that's being asked here. The type of comparison made is between naturalism and general theism. And so, of course, we're going to present the case that the Christian God is the best explanation for that. But we tend to, we'll probably go more of a internal critique from there, and we'll see what he does here. But for the most part, we're just kind of comparing as little factors as possible between the two. One presents its case from a naturalistic, no creator point of view, and the other one presents it as a entirely intelligent design aspect to it. So that's where we're at in chapter 12 here. And he starts out by saying the heart of scientism is the conviction that science can explain virtually everything. If there is not a valid scientific explanation for an event or state, then that is not properly an object of our knowledge. In reality, though, there are many things that science can't explain. And the problem is not that we lack sufficient data. The problem is that the sorts of thing that science cannot explain, there are those things they can't even explain, even in principle. So moreover, these things are items that we know to be true. But what makes all of this especially interesting is that theism actually can explain them. Theism isn't confined by only the naturalistic things. It can bring in other factors that presents a more coherent, better accounting for the case of why these things are. And so he says, let's look at these 5 different things that theism can explain, but science cannot.
Right. Okay. And so he begins. So what he's going to do here in this particular section is two things. He's gonna in this section, on this first section, is called Science Cannot Explain the Origin of the Universe, right? And the first thing he's going to do is examine a particular argument for the existence of God, the cosmological argument, and show how that explains the origin of the universe. And then he's going to move into why science can't explain the origin of the universe. So he says, it is now beyond reasonable doubt that the universe, a system of time, space, and matter, non-personal energy, right, began to exist at some finite time ago, right? So he's suggesting that's beyond reasonable doubt that the universe began to exist. And so he tells us that the cosmological argument, a powerful argument for this fact from God, for God's existence, was formulated many centuries ago, but it has received renewed interest in the last few decades. And he gives us a version. I think this is probably his version of it. There are a couple of versions of it. This is a little bit different version of the Kalam-Kalasma argument than we see in somebody like William Lane Craig. It's
Right.
similar, but not exactly the same.
Correct.
So Craig's argument goes something like this: whatever begins to exist had a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe had a cause. That's kind of Craig's angle on the Kalam-Kalasma argument. His particular presentation of it, he starts off with these two premises. The universe had a beginning. The beginning of the universe was caused. The cause of the beginning of the universe was personal. So that's how he frames the cosmological argument.
Right. Right. Exactly. So the philosophical evidence that the universe had a beginning, he moves on by saying, as we saw in an early chapter, one philosophical argument for premise 1 involves the impossibility of crossing an actual infinite number of events. And again, this is one that you kind of have to use your brain power to picture, because what is an actual series of events? And there's someone like Craig who likes the hotel model and talking about moving up a room and an infinite number of rooms. But in order to do that, you have to go back an infinite number of rooms in order to move. And so you could never move rooms because you're always traversing an infinite number of rooms to get to the next one. And so
Yeah, I think he calls it the Hilbert's Hotel or
yeah,
something like that. where if you have a full it's an infinite number of rooms in a hotel, and every room is full, but there's an infinite number of rooms. And so someone comes in and wants another room, and the proprietor doesn't say it's full. He says, sure, and he shifts everybody one room over because it's an infinite number. And now you have a room open, and that person can fill that room. But but there's no addition to the people to the rooms because
Right.
it's still infinite, right? Which is kind of deal, right? That's what he gets at.
Right. Right. So, in order for us to get here at this time, and again, your here is different than my here, and that's a different problem, we'd have to cross an infinite amount of time. Well, okay, just keep waiting forever and you'll finally get here. Well, we're here, which means that we didn't cross an infinite number of forevers. And so that means that here, because we're here, time isn't actually infinite. And so this impossibility of crossing that actual infinite is just not possible. And so you can have the math work out, and we can talk about infinite there, but it's more of a general concept for our math to work out than finding them within the scope of the real universe here. So an actual infinite is a collection of things that is infinitely larger than any finite number. So there's our definition. If the universe had no beginning, the number of events crossed to reach the present moment would be, again, actually infinite. And so because we're here, we know we didn't cross an actual infinite because we'd still be going in order to get here. So therefore, not only does that tell us the universe has a beginning, but I think that also tells us the universe actually has an end. So there's an interesting take to that, as well as maybe we're okay with knowing the beginning of the universe, but I think we're all maybe a little bit more trepidatious about the end of it all.
Right. So that's his first argument. That's his philosophical argument that shows that the universe had a beginning, right? Because you can't have an actual infinite number of events. Then he moves to what he calls his scientific evidence that the universe had a beginning. So we just saw his philosophical argument, now his scientific evidence. And he tells us that while there are two scientific arguments that the universe had a beginning, in his view, the philosophical argument is stronger than either of the scientific arguments, and he believes it establishes a beginning without needing further support. And so while science, he tells us, can provide evidence that the universe had a beginning, it cannot say what caused the beginning, right? And so one scientific argument for premise one, which again says that the universe had a beginning, derives from the second law of thermodynamics. All right, which is in one form states that the amount of useful energy in the universe is irreversibly being used up. Right? That's the basic idea, at least, kind of a version of it. And so if the universe were infinitely old, it would have already used up all its useful energy, which is kind of an interesting kind of twist, right?
Right.
So, the universe is running down, all the energy is being used up. So if it was infinite, all the energy would have been used up. It's not used up, and therefore it hasn't been around for an infinite time period. All right, that's the basic idea.
Right. And even if you wanted to have an outside force put in a energy within our universe, well, then you're getting to a supernatural, literally a supernatural
Beyond
event.
natural, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then, again, that's something that purely naturalistic science doesn't want to do. And so we can't even allow that to happen. So, the idea of things like the second one that he brings up here, the argument for the classical Big Bang theory, currently the most reasonable and widely respected theory regarding the origin of the universe. Again, just taking the premise of this is what most people consider kind of the start of it all. He says, okay, we might have qualms with it, but he's going to kind of take it and assume it as fact here. Well, the Big Bang model theory, it confirms the fact that space-time physical universe had a beginning. The scientists have discovered evidence that galaxies are accelerating away from each other. If you were to reverse time and extrapolate backwards, you'd reach a point in space and time and matter which would spring to existence at the initial creation event. And in the book, he talks about kind of putting a spot on a balloon and blowing it up. And so there you're having that dot go away from other parts of the dot, and you're seeing expand. And so you can only go back to a certain point when the balloon is blown up, but it was at that point that the balloon was blown up and the dot was made to expand. And so it doesn't do any good to go before that. So we know at some point the universe that is our dot on the balloon has been made and then blown up and expanded. We talk about this when it's covered with redshift radiation, and that took out the solid state model quite a bit and was supplanted with the Big Bang model as well.
All right, so there's his second scientific argument, he tells us, right? The classical Big Bang theory that shows that the universe had a beginning.